When you think of Rome, you probably think of gladiators, gold, and in general, the greatest empire of all time. And while you're not wrong, it's also important to know the dark sides and failures of the empire as well. In this video, we'll cover battles you've never heard of, emperors that may not live up to their reputations, and some facts that historians even argue about. So let's get into it right now. We're going to start this off with Nero, the man who fiddled while Rome burned. Well, to start with, he couldn't have fiddled while Rome burned because the fiddle wasn't even a thing yet, but he did play the lyre, which was another stringed instrument. He also wasn't even in Rome when it happened, but we'll get to that in a second. Nero was the 5th emperor of Rome, and he succeeded his stepdad Claudius on the throne. He reigned for about 14 years after his mother Julia Agrippa was involved in tons of conspiracies to get him on the throne. First, she had Emperor Claudius's previous wife Valeria framed for adultery, which ultimately led to her death. Then she married Claudius, who happened to be her uncle. As messed up as that already is, she then convinced Claudius to make Nero his heir instead of his own son Britannicus. She then had Nero marry Claudius's daughter Octavia. Now Octavia would have been Nero's mother's first cousin, so he kind of kept it in the family there, if you know what I'm saying. After all this political maneuvering, Julia then poisoned Claudius and made Nero the emperor at only 16 years old. She's basically the real-life Cersei Lannister. Anyway, Nero started out as a timid and seemingly caring emperor. He hated signing death orders, he gave power back to the Senate, and he even lowered taxes, which Lord knows we could use some of that today. He was very interested in music and he saw himself as a performance artist. He played the lyre and he sang, but people said he wasn't that good. Pretty soon Nero started going downhill in general. He decided to have his overbearing, crazy mother put to death, which honestly, after all she did, that's not the worst outcome she could have asked for. Like, there's way worse she deserved. Next, he had his cousin wife Octavia murdered so he could marry the woman that he actually loved. This didn't end well either though. His pregnant now wife had their first child, but it died soon after birth. She got pregnant again, but then her and Nero got into a fight in which he kicked her in the stomach and killed both her and the unborn baby. After this, Nero's brutality began to show itself in its entirety. There were several major uprisings against him, all of which failed. There was his persecution of Christians. There were many other points of contention during his reign, but all of that came to a head during the Great Fire of Rome of 64. This fire saw 10 of Rome's 14 districts completely destroyed or greatly damaged. It saw hundreds of dead citizens, and it saw the blame placed squarely on the feet of Nero, who was rumored to have started the fire. To be specific, it said that he started the fire and fiddled while Rome burned, which I already said could not have happened because he was not even in Rome. He was in Actium, which is 35 miles away. His actions after the fire fueled the rumors that he started the fire because he used the destroyed districts of Rome to build his golden palace in. And let me tell you, this thing was massive. Basically, they claimed that he burned the city to clear space for this massive golden house. Now, while this probably wasn't true, he started blaming Christians for the fire just so he could shift the blame off of him, and that's when he really started persecuting them. His tenure started going downhill fast, and it's actually after the fire that he was said to have kicked his wife and child and killed them both. After this, he commits another atrocity. He takes a young boy that looks like his dead wife, castrates him, and marries him. Now, you know what that implies as well as I do, and it's just gross. Now, eventually, one of the many revolts against his reign actually works out. He's ousted by the Senate itself, and they force him to take his own life. He's only about 30 years old at this time, and this was a roller coaster of a life of a very controversial figure. Just real quick, thank you a ton for watching. If you're enjoying the video, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out more than you could ever know. And now, let's get back into it. The Praetorian Guard was an elite group of soldiers, bodyguards, spies, pretty much you name it, they could do it. They were originally personal bodyguards for commanders during the Roman Republic days, but Augustus expanded and changed their function a little bit. He created cohorts of men, installing 9 at first, each of which was made up of about 500 to 1,000 men. They had their own stations around the Roman Empire, but obviously their main station was in Rome itself. They were seen as the most elite and loyal of all Roman troops, and they were pretty much the only people that were allowed to carry weapons when in the presence of emperors, which they would use later on, which we're going to talk about. Remember when I said they did a little bit of everything? Well, aside from being imperial bodyguards, they also did crowd control, they did espionage, like they gathered intel from domestic and foreign sources, they did a little bit of firefighting whenever there were fires that broke out, and obviously they enforced the rulings of the Senate and the emperor. They even did spec ops, like infiltrating the groups of dissenters and rebels and stuff like that. They did have a problem. They began to develop a mind of their own. They didn't just work for the Senate and the emperor anymore. They began to sell the emperorship to the highest bidder, and sometimes they even carried out assassinations on the current emperor so that they could get the next bidder in line on the throne, whatever. One time they literally assassinated an emperor and put him on the throne, but then they assassinated him because he didn't pay up like he was supposed to. I'm not gonna name any names, but there's a certain group in the USA that acts a lot like this. CIA, oh, I don't know what that was. They would eventually be disbanded by Constantine the Great because they disbanded a loser for the throne and basically lost. But anyway, at that point in time, it was probably a good thing. They had simply grown too corrupt, although you could even argue that they were created to do such things that they did. But anyway, that's aside the point. Roman triumphs were basically huge parades that were held in Rome for generals that won great battles. They started all the way back in the days of the Republic. The Senate would throw these massive processions for generals that they felt deserved them. They would get robes and wreaths, they would parade around the city and show everybody all the spoils of war. A lot of the time they would even parade around the losers of the battles that they just won. Like they would take them captive, have them walking around in chains, and just walk through the city in shame. It's really bad. They would have feasts and they would have skits, like they would have actors act out battles from the war that they just fought. Honestly, the best modern day equivalent to this that I can think of is like a Super Bowl parade in the city of the team that won. Well, either that or Mardi Gras in Louisiana, because that gets wild. But anyway, everybody just gets together and celebrates. During the imperial days, these triumphs were only held for emperors rather than all the generals of the empire. Oh yeah, I didn't mention ovations. A triumph is up here and an ovation is one step down in like the level of celebration. They were lesser celebrations for lesser victories, but nonetheless, they were still cool. They were still just parties. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest is one of the most important battles in all of Roman history. It was a battle between Roman legions under Augustus and a coalition of Germanic people under Arminius, and it took place in 9 AD. This was the battle that separated Germania from Roman territory forever, and it was a major failure on the Romans' part. Alright, some background here. The Germanic general Arminius was raised in Rome, and he received a Roman education and military training. He worked his way up in the Roman military until he served under General Varus against the Germanic people of this area. Under Varus, he served as kind of like a messenger or a liaison to the Germanic people because he spoke their languages, he was from that culture, stuff like that. As such, he was able to organize a coalition of these Germanic people to stand against Rome and organize an ambush. As summer wound down and the Romans began to move back toward their winter camps, Arminius told the leader Varus that there was a rebellion somewhere along an alternate path back to those winter camps. Varus diverted his military from the main path to go squash that rebellion on the way home, and that was where he was ambushed by this coalition of Germanic people led by his own general Arminius. The Romans camped for the rest of the day after suffering huge losses, and then they started marching back at night. They marched directly into another German trap. The Romans lost between 15 and 20,000 troops, and their leader Varus took his own life. After this, the Germanic tribes wiped out every single Roman settlement or institution, anything west of the Rhine River. That part of Germania would never be taken by the Romans. This battle let the world know that despite all their greatness, the Romans were mortal. Arminius went on to be a Germanic folk legend. On the other hand, Emperor Augustus was said to have banged his head and said, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Caesar's civil war was a massive political conflict between Julius Caesar and his former friend and ally Pompey. It all started with Caesar's great success in Gaul, which made him enough money to pay people back in Rome to make all his political moves for him. It's all super convoluted, but to make a long story short, he wanted to serve as consul for his second term upon his return from Gaul, so he paid people to help him accomplish this. At the time, Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey were all friends and allies and made up the first triumvirate. Crassus died, and Pompey's wife Julia, who was also Julius Caesar's daughter, also died, and that basically caused Julius and Pompey to have a falling out, and they weren't friends anymore. Pompey sided with the Senate, who believed that if Caesar came back from his great victories in Gaul and became consul for the second time, he would basically run Roman politics for the rest of his life. They were right, by the way. Whenever all this was over, he came back to Rome and declared himself dictator for life, so, you know, they had it right. Before the war, the Senate gave Pompey special control of their entire military, which led to the Civil War. They tried to charge Caesar with crimes of abusing his power whenever he was consul and in Gaul, but in all actuality, they just wanted this man out of the political limelight. He was to disband his armies at once and return to Rome. Well, he returned alright, but with his armies. He crossed the Rubicon River into Italy, and in only about 2 months he conquered the entire mainland because most of the troops sided with him over Pompey anyway. The Pompey faction fled to Greece, and Caesar returned to Rome itself and established a new senate to authorize his actions. Caesar then marched on Spain, which was where a lot of Pompey's allies and troops were, and he secured Hispania for himself. He marched on Dyrrhachium, a city in modern-day Albania, where he was all but defeated and forced to retreat. Pompey then got cocky. He engaged Caesar's forces in the Battle of Pharsalus, and his men got dog-walked. Pompey fled to Alexandria, Egypt, where he thought he would be greeted with a warm welcome, but he was basically assassinated on the spot. Now, Caesar was following him to defeat him for the final time, but he was actually really sad because he didn't want his former friend to die like that. That's when he got involved in Egyptian politics. Caesar fought on Cleopatra's side of the Egyptian succession war, and he instilled her on the throne. Now, after some funny business with her, which resulted in the love child Caesarion, he eventually returned to his own rat killing in Rome. At one point, he won a battle so easily that he came up with the legendary saying, "I came, I saw, I conquered." If you ever wonder where that came from, it was from him. He was declared dictator for life in Rome, and he set the framework for the Roman Empire to be created. The Roman Maniple system was the tactical unit of soldiers that the Roman military used before cohorts were introduced. A maniple was made up of 120 men in groups of 10 that made up a checkerboard pattern of formation. This formation was made popular during the Samnite Wars between the Roman Republic and the Samnite people during like 315 BC. This formation was more flexible than the Greek phalanx, which was necessary because of the rough terrain of the Samnium. By the way, Samnium is a place in southern Italy that was inhabited by the native Italic people, the Samnites. I didn't know this, so I figured you might not either, so there's that for you. Anyway, the soldiers in a maniple were grouped front to back in 4 different groups. At the front were the Velites, who were light skirmishers that used light swords and javelins. Next up were the Hastati, who were spearmen and swordsmen that used light armor. Like the Velites, they were younger and poorer than the next 2 positions we're going to talk about. Next up were the Princeps, who were prime, wealthy soldiers who used heavy armor, swords, and or spears, and some shields. Next up you have the Triarii, who were older soldiers that were very wealthy. They had heavy metal armor, shields, spears, and they were thought to be the best fighters in the entire Roman military. The Manipular system won Rome the Samnite and Punic Wars, as well as probably the Macedonian Wars we're going to talk about later, so yeah, it was very effective as a unit. Aurelian, the restorer of the world, is next. He reigned from 270 to 275 AD, and he saved Rome from the brink of collapse following the crisis of the 3rd century. Now, we briefly mentioned this during the last Roman Iceberg video, but the 3rd century crisis was basically a perfect storm of rebellions, barbarian attacks, and economic problems for Rome. Aurelian came into power when the empire was split into 3 factions: the Roman Empire, the Gallic Empire, and the Palmyrene Empire. He first reconquered the Palmyrene Empire through a series of battles in Asia Minor and a siege of the city of Palmyra. In 275, he easily took back the Gallic Empire, who really didn't even want autonomy that badly. See, during the height of the 3rd century crisis, the Gallic people were desperate for the help of the people of Rome because of barbarian invaders that were just tearing them up. But Rome had so many problems on the home front that they couldn't spare any troops to actually go help them. For a brief period of time, Gaul broke off and established their own empire so that they could unite under one banner to fight off all these invaders. Aurelian was basically able to go in there and say, "Hey, we'll do better this time, come on back," and they did. I think he actually did some political bribing, but we're not even going to talk about that because, you know, that just happened all the time back then. Aside from reunification, Aurelian also headed several different reformation efforts, starting with religion. Because of the great division and chaos that Rome underwent during the 3rd century crisis, they really needed a religion to unite under. Traditional Roman religion had mixed with Eastern mythology and basically wrecked any semblance of unified worship, so Aurelian pushed the Roman sun god Sol Invictus to be their new god to worship. It symbolized victory, stability, and eternal rule under the everlasting sun, so it was a really good attempt at monotheism. He had a massive temple built to worship Sol Invictus, and he held an annual festival of the sun god on December 25th. Now, lots of this attempt at monotheism inspired what Constantine would later do with Christianity, especially the whole December 25th is Christ's birthday despite historical records stating otherwise. Now, I am a Christian, but the whole Christ was born on December 25th and that's when we're going to celebrate his birthday thing is crazy to me because that was not his birthday and that was not when we were commanded to celebrate his birth. It was every day that we're supposed to celebrate that. But anyway, I'm off my high horse now. Aurelian also reformed the monetary system, like he introduced a currency with less percentage of silver in it. Is the whole thing. He changed the way food distribution systems worked in Rome, like he would ensure that higher quality, larger quantity amounts of stuff were available to people for the same price as before. He had the Aurelian walls built around the 7 hills of Rome to defend the city. These walls were up to like 8 meters high, and they were crucial in the defense of the city against like the barbarian invaders of the time and the times after that. In 275 AD, a group of Praetorian Guards assassinated Aurelian as he waited to go on a military campaign in Persia. Rumors spread by his own secretary panicked the Praetorian Guards, and they resolved to kill one of the greatest emperors that the Roman Empire had ever seen. Now, while that's terribly sad, he had already made his mark on the world and set up the Roman Empire for success in the future, which Diocletian would like expand upon later. I feel like Aurelian would have been the greatest emperor of all time if he served more than just 5 years. Imagine what he could have done in 10. But anyway, that's beside the point. A fun fact for you, the city of Orleans in France was actually named after Aurelian, so in a way, Aurelian influences even us in the US today because New Orleans, Louisiana is named after him. So that's pretty cool. Rome in Ireland refers to the relationship between ancient Rome and Hibernia, which was the ancient name for Ireland. Rome never conquered Hibernia, likely because they had no real reason to. First of all, it was really hard to get there because they'd have to cross the Irish Sea. Hibernia didn't have many large cities, agricultural resources, or important minerals, so the risk to reward ratio for Rome just wasn't worth it. They did trade with them though. Roman goods are continuously found on Ireland, especially the east side, which is like the British side. Some Irishmen served as mercenaries in Roman armies, and Roman style weapons were very popular in Ireland. The biggest Roman influence on Ireland was in like culture and religion though. Christianity reached Ireland by way of the Romanized British people, and it completely overhauled their entire society. You ever heard of that guy St. Patrick? Well, he was from Roman Britain, and he orchestrated the spread of Christianity through Ireland, and now we have a holiday with his name attached to it where we pinch each other if we don't wear green. Man, how times have changed. Legio Gemina means the twin legion in Latin, and it refers to the merging of 2 Roman legions after heavy casualties or reorganizations. An example of a Legio Gemina is the Legio 13 that served under Julius Caesar. This legion would cross the Rubicon with Caesar and carry out his orders through the entire civil war. Later on, it was reestablished under Octavian using the remnants of Caesar's Legio 13 and another legion, and it would become the Legio 13 Gemina. It was one of the most elite units in all of Rome, and it would remain that way basically until Rome's demise. Unlike other Roman legions that were symbolized by a bull or something like that, the 13th was symbolized by a lion, which was just aura. There was also a Legio 14 Gemina or twinned 14th Legion, but they just weren't as cool as the 13th. The Macedonian Wars were a series of 4 wars fought between the Roman Republic and Macedonia over territory in the Greek world. To start off with, the Romans had already defeated Carthage in the First Punic War, and they turned their sights on more territory in the Mediterranean. Macedonia held lots of territory in the eastern part of the Mediterranean thanks to the conquest of Alexander the Great, and in 214 BC, these powers clashed. Philip V of Macedon allied himself with Hannibal against Rome in the Second Punic War. Rome was fully tied up with Carthage, so while Macedonia was invading the Balkans, the Romans had to seek allies in the Greek world to stand against them. As Roman allies attacked Macedonian territories, Philip was forced to concentrate his efforts in Greece. Eventually, the Treaty of Phenice was signed and peace was temporarily established. Just 5 years later, Philip V started attacking Rome-allied Greek territories, and Rome told him to stop or there'd be war. He didn't stop because he didn't believe Rome was all that they were cracked up to be military-wise, because just 5 years ago they'd easily fought them to a standstill. Rome declared war, a lot of battles and invasions were traded, and Philip was greatly defeated in the Battle of Cynocephalae. This battle was a defining moment in warfare history because it showed the superiority of the Roman legion to the Greek phalanx. Anyway, Philip was forced to sign the Treaty of Tempea, which basically said that Macedonia had to relinquish all Greek and other territories that they held, which must have been humiliating. They had to stay within their own borders now, and this is the empire that Alexander the Great once conquered the world with. On the other hand, Rome also relinquished their Greek territories and let the Greeks be because they wanted to be seen as liberators rather than conquerors for now. The peace between the two kingdoms lasted for about 26 years until Philip V died and his son Perseus took over. Perseus began making alliances in Greece, and he married into the royal family of the Seleucid Empire, which Rome had just had a war with in between the Second Macedonian War and now. Perseus was ambitious and anti-Rome, and he was looking to conquer Greece once again. Rome felt threatened, so they stepped in, because that's what Rome does. Now, Rome actually struggled against Perseus like a lot at first, but they eventually turned this around. They appointed a new commander, and they landed in the decisive battle of Pydna near Katerini, Greece. Rome only had about 25,000 troops, whereas Macedonia had 40,000, but like I said, the Roman legion was superior to the Greek phalanx. Uneven territories led to broken phalanxes, and the Roman legions that were organized into maniples that we talked about earlier just dominated them. Perseus panicked and fled the battle, which led to the absolute collapse of his forces. Rome routed them and captured Perseus and paraded him around in the following triumph. Macedon as a kingdom was completely dismantled and split into 4 different republics that all had to pay large tributes to Rome. Rome saw that a free Greek world would continue to lead to problems for them, so they basically took over the entire area so as to keep the peace. 18 years later, a man named Andriscus claimed to be the son of Perseus and the rightful ruler of Macedon. He raised an army and he actually fought off Roman troops that were sent to quell his rebellion. Rome acted swiftly now so that Macedon didn't rise again. Andriscus's forces were crushed in a second battle of Pydna. Rome now didn't let Macedonia have any autonomy at all, and they took them in as a province of theirs. In 146 BC, Rome took in the entirety of Greece as their territory now, instead of just being the overseers. Macedon would never be the same, which completely ended everything that Alexander the Great ever worked for. Romanus Eunt Domus refers to the Monty Python bit that mocks Roman and Latin stickler rules for grammar and all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna put a link in the description to the actual bit so that you can watch this if you don't know what I'm talking about, but here's kind of what it is. The movie set in ancient Jerusalem during the Roman occupation during like the birth and years of Christ, and the main character Brian is forced to join an anti-Roman rebel group and graffiti on the walls anti-Roman sentiments. He's caught by a Roman centurion writing Romanus Eunt Domus on the walls of Jericho, and this is very, very improper grammar. Instead of arresting him, the centurion gives him a grammar lesson. Brian was trying to write Romans go home, which the centurion tells him would be Romani ite dumun instead of Romanus Eunt Domus or whatever it was. The centurion threatens him to write this out 100 times before sunrise or he'll cut off his nether regions. It's a classic Monty Python mockery and the perfect stopping point for this video. You've heard tons of stuff about Rome in this video, but I guarantee you there's going to be some stuff about Rome and every other ancient civilization in history that you don't know about in this video right here. Now I'm going to go play the fiddle and hope that my hometown does not burn down. Peace.